For over 10 years, we've kept worms, bred worms, and produced all kinds of castings. The key to success isn't in following the rules, but learning why the rules were made in the first place. Worm farming is simple. We just like to complicate it. In fact, it's so simple we can boil it down to 2 key factors for success. Or really, 2 key factors to avoid failing. Don't let your system dry out, and don't overfeed. Moisture is the blood of your system, and if you run out of it, your system will fail. Moisture is everything when creating quality castings or breeding worms. And if you harvest with a sifter, drying the bedding out just enough is critical, but not too much because moisture is how your biology breathes. Oh, did we forget to mention the biology? Yeah, you're not making a worm farm so much as a biology farm. Your worms share their home with billions of species of bacteria and fungi, and your job is to make all of them happy. Conveniently, moisture is a great way to do that. Moisture levels should be roughly 60 to 70% for compost and 80 to 90% for breeding. You could grab a moisture meter, but your index finger is really the better low-cost option, and nothing is a hard rule. But why do we suggest more for breeding? Because you want to maximize their activity. And nothing slows a worm down faster than a lack of water. Worm activity is correlated to both moisture and temperature. Mainly, don't let your system dry out because your worms and bacteria will die. Moisture, again, is how they breathe via diffusion, which is similar to fish. In fact, worms can even survive underwater, as long as it's oxygenated. If you hear talk about overwatering systems, it's for standing water. An unmoving pool of water will trend towards anaerobic, which just means no oxygen. And the worms use water to breathe oxygen. So if the oxygen isn't in the water, yeah, there's no breathing. Fun technical note. Water is H2O, but that O oxygen is not available because it's bonded to the hydrogen atoms. So worms or fish can't breathe it. What they breathe is actually dissolved O2 gas in water. And as water sits around, it loses those O2 molecules. This is why fish tanks have bubblers. So keep your worms wet, but not so wet that the water pools and prevents airflow. A common technique to prevent this issue is drilling drain holes. It's not required, but drain holes can be more forgiving if you're a beginner, preventing overwatering. So worms can technically survive underwater, but they can't survive without food. The good news is the dirt that they live in is a food source. Even if they run out of human food, they can fall back on paper, compost, or any carbon material with bacteria. But if you put watermelon in, they're definitely going for that first. Worms love watermelon. You can feed them any produce or vegetable scraps, but moderate acidic foods like citrus, they can eat them just fine, but technically it can increase the acidity in their environment. Make sure to keep any grains you have moist, or they will dry, harden, and the worms won't eat it. And don't put meat or dairy in there, which worms can eat, but it smells, attracts pests or predators, and no one wants to deal with that. One thing you really should avoid is oil from cooked foods. Worms can't breathe in oil, and water and oil do not mix, so keep the oil off the worms. But what happens if you overfeed? And how do you know? The worms will leave, or at least try. They'll look for somewhere nicer to live, and oftentimes it's your floor or walls. Your worms and bacteria will tell you when something is wrong, either by physically leaving or producing odor, or new pests will arrive. But your bin shouldn't smell bad. If it does, it's most likely due to overfeeding or feeding gaseous vegetables such as broccoli or Brussels sprouts, or you added something you shouldn't like dairy or meat. And how can you fix it? Rebalance their moisture in food. You probably overfed, so first take out all the food you added. Remember that even after taking out all the food, the worms and bacteria can still snack on the bedding itself, so they won't starve. So, number 1, take out all the food. Number 2, add carbon in the form of paper, cardboard, potting mix, etc. And number 3, don't water for a bit. But why does this work? The system is obviously not happy, so we undo what we added and reset back to a baseline. Excess food increased the nitrogen in your system, and now bacteria can use that nitrogen as fuel to break down the added carbon, rebalancing your system. But worms may leave for other reasons. They will leave if they are searching for moisture, and they may also leave when first introduced to a new system. Moving is stressful for everyone, including worms. Some ways to make the transition easier are: add an overhead light, which encourages them to stay in the bedding while they adjust, or moisten the bedding before adding the worms, and they'll migrate down to the moisture. Another ideal for new systems is to add starter material such as worm castings, potting soil, or compost, or bedding from another worm bin, which helps set up the microbiome. We don't feed in the first few days, but it's not a hard rule. The reason why is to prevent overfeeding. If the worms are stressed, they may not be ready to eat yet. so the food can rot, triggering the smell, pests, or exodus from overfeeding. You'll also want to watch out for overfeeding during hot or cold temperatures, because worm activity will slow down as temperatures become more extreme. When worms are cold, they'll huddle together and slow down. When it's hot, they'll often stop feeding and try to escape to cooler temps. The ideal temperature for composting worms is around 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and they can survive in temps from 40 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Note that this is the temperature of the bedding, which may not always match the temperature of the environment, because soil can act as an insulator. And if you want to know the exact temperature, you can always pick up a soil thermometer. We keep our worms air conditioned in 76 degrees Fahrenheit, but if you're working outside, you'll need to take measures to moderate temperatures. There's a ton of nuance depending on which part of the world you're in, but the easiest answer is just move the system inside to air conditioning during cold snaps or heat waves, or increase insulation. The larger the system, the larger the thermal biomass, so it will take longer for the temperature to change. And remember, you're not just raising worms, but colonies of bacteria and fungi which thrive and die off in different temperature ranges. Which brings us to an important point. You generally should not add worms to your traditional compost pile. What happens there is bacteria break down the materials, which releases heat, which allows increasingly hot-loving bacteria species to take over and continue to break down the materials, ramping up the temperature further until the worms die. You're decomposing through a different process, thermophilic composting, where temps reach well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you were paying attention, yes, this can happen when overfeeding in a worm bin. Excess food is broken down by bacteria, which releases heat, encouraging more heat-friendly bacteria to break down materials and generate more heat. This is problematic for worms in enclosed systems, where they cannot leave naturally when temperatures ramp up. So while you can add worms to a slow, cool compost pile, they're not interested in a hot, warm summer, and accidentally making a traditional compost pile in a worm bin is a great way to make your worms unhappy quickly. Speaking of closed containers, what's the best container for your worms? Just about anything. Honestly, it doesn't matter too much as long as it allows air and retains some moisture. Plastic, glass, metal, or untreated wood all work. My personal favorite is the good old 5-gallon bucket. You can drill it, stack it, and it won't get as heavy as a 20-gallon tote when full, making it easy to move inside during extreme temperatures. A key tip is to drill holes on the sides near the top and not on the lid. Why is because it's too easy to accidentally stack them or place something on top, removing the airflow and suffocating the worms. But should you even have a lid? You could go either way. A plastic lid is actually great for retaining moisture and of course preventing a worm exodus. The downside is moisture can collect in the lid, causing the worms to spend time exploring up there. A middle ground is throwing some paper, cardboard, or leaves on the top layer. Removing a lid allows more air and lets some moisture evaporate, which can be useful if you don't use drain holes, but may require you to water more often. Again, everything is a balance, and the goal is to maintain moisture. And if you're working outside, lids can also be useful to prevent pests. Using a lid, burying food, or otherwise reducing entry points can all prevent some pests and can be useful when working outdoors. But you are running a decomposition factory, and whether you like it or not, organisms are part of natural decomposition. While the bacteria and fungi are microscopic, other critters might be more visible. The good news is many of these are actually not a problem, like springtails or roly-poly, and will also work to break down materials. But they can be a problem if they outcompete the worms for food. If you need to remove them, many pests have ideal temperature and moisture conditions, so you can adjust those to discourage their activities. But back to containers. The bottom line is, use whatever you already have and maintain moisture. It doesn't have to be a specialized worm keeper at all, though some worm keepers do have mechanisms to harvest compost. But how do you know when it's time to harvest your worm castings? It's never ready because it's always ready. There will always be some percentage of worm castings in your system, and the compost is ready when most of the food is processed and the material looks uniform. Technically, you can harvest it early and there will still be castings, just a lower percentage. Harvesting castings comes down to one thing: separating worms from the material. This can be done by removing the worms by hand, mechanically sifting the castings, or convincing the worms to move out of the harvest zone, or a combination of any of these. The easiest way to separate worms is to bait them to either a corner or higher up in a tiered system that can be harvested from the bottom. You can pull up clusters of worms with bait and sift the remaining material. It's not always easy, but it's not complicated. And really, none of this is complicated. Even if you make mistakes, you can course correct. The two keys are to maintain moisture and not overfeed. Your ecosystem is alive, so as long as you pay attention and adjust to meet its needs, you'll keep your decomposers happy and productive. This was 10 minutes and we breezed over most of the topics, but we'll be covering more topics in detail in the coming months, so let us know in the comments if there's any topics you'd like to learn more about and we can all be nerdy together.